Theoretical physics relies on a persistent mathematical assumption that systems can be built from the ground up out of an absolute void. This reliance on ex nihilo construction, attempting to build robust structures from empty sets and frictionless point particles, forces conventional frameworks to begin without adequately defining the bounding constraints that permit their existence. We see the consequences of this when theorists attempt to forcefully embed discrete algebraic recurrences, like the integer-based Fibonacci sequence, into continuous topological manifolds. The mathematical system encounters an intense, measurable geometric resistance, known as Nash-Moser topological friction. Nash-Moser topological friction occurs when the differential operator linking metric curvature to a mathematical space forces a function's smoothness to violently drop, grinding iteration to a halt. Classical frameworks extrapolate their formulas to extreme scales while ignoring this geometric heat at their own perimeters. Because they fail to account for the exact friction of their boundaries, their mathematical spaces cannot achieve compact closure, and their structures effectively leak into infinity. A solution to this epistemological crisis emerges from a recent submission by the Vancouver Independent Research Nexus. Documented formally as Book LXVI, the submission details a highly specific mathematical state called the chiral pi resonance modality. Throughout the history of classical physics and discrete mathematics, the constant pi has functioned almost exclusively as an external bounding limit. It serves as an asymptotic mirage, acting as an unreachable perimeter for discrete roots. The Vancouver submission proves that this continuous boundary architecture can be collapsed inward. Pi can be repositioned as an internal, load-bearing algebraic pillar that structurally supports a discrete equation from the inside out. This chart shows a reduced discriminant calculation, highlighting a strictly positive final value anchored safely in the green real zone. The massive continuous weight of pi absorbs the spatial boundary directly into the calculation. By overpowering the negative integer mass, pi functions as topological ballast. To prevent analytical breakdown in extreme dimensions, continuous spatial boundaries cannot simply be ignored or treated as external filters. They must be structurally captured and completely internalized within the equations themselves. We can trace exactly how this capture occurs by examining the core of the Vancouver submission, the chiral gate. The gate begins as a polynomial constructed from contiguous Fibonacci integers, 233, 144, and 89. The J2 direct duality operator enforces inverse purity via phase shifts, expressed as arc sine x plus arc cosine x equals pi over 2, forcing the manifolds into a singular chiral collision. The arc cosine function is stripped away, welding the Fibonacci masses to the pi boundary. Isolating the phase variable extracts the fused form, negative 15,553 theta squared plus 16,776 pi theta plus 5,184 equals 0. The discrete integer sequences are no longer isolated mathematical projections. They are permanently locked to the continuous geometric perimeter. To understand why this precise metallurgical weld is necessary, we must perform an apophatic evaluation. We must calculate what the system would do if we stripped the continuous pi boundary away completely. Removing the continuous constraint leaves a hypothetical void state. We evaluate this using the discriminant, b squared minus 4ac. The arithmetic yields 72 squared minus 4 times negative 233 times 89, resulting in a massive negative discriminant, negative 15,553. In algebraic topology, a massively negative discriminant dictates that the phase roots for the equation are purely imaginary. Passing an imaginary phase through a continuous transcendental manifold triggers a catastrophic systemic event known as the hyperbolic trapdoor. The hyperbolic trapdoor is a structural failure where bounded spatial variables abruptly transition into unbounded, non-compact mathematical domains. Multiplication by the imaginary unit corresponds geometrically to a strict rotation out of the real number line and into the complex plane. The discrete roots fail to map to the bounded space, violently ejected from the physical manifold into unbounded hyperbolic dimensions. The theoretical framework defines this exact mathematical transformation as the 90-degree spinorial twist. This ejection represents a fatal failure of surjective invariance. Surjective invariance is a topological property where a mapping covers its entire target space. When it fails, the geometric choke point physically forces the roots to leak to infinity. Without an internalized continuous boundary to stabilize the discriminant, discrete mathematics violently ejects itself from physical reality, collapsing into an untethered mathematical hallucination. Returning to the true discriminant calculation, we reintroduce the continuous pi term to observe its exact mechanical function. This chart shows the components of the discriminant calculation. The negative weight of the discrete mass, negative 20,737, drags the equation toward the imaginary zone. Multiplying the continuous pi boundary yields an enormous positive shift, completely dwarfing the destabilizing negative mass. This mathematical overpowering of the negative mass is the precise definition of topological ballast. The addition of the transcendental value cleanly resolves the mathematical tension. The inner emergent pi literally pulls the entire discriminant firmly across the threshold of zero, anchoring it deep in the positive real domain. Because the true discriminant remains strictly positive, the phase roots for the equation remain strictly real. Topological ballast allows baroots to safely navigate the continuous boundary. The massive internal weight completely neutralizes the hyperbolic trapdoor, anchoring the data coordinates safely and permanently in the manifest one-dimensional physical plane. The Vancouver submission formally designates this newly stabilized mathematical condition as the syncretic state. In this state, continuous spatial boundaries are absorbed directly into a discrete polynomial as structural mass. To ratify this state and ensure it is a conserved residual rather than a localized error, it must pass a rigorous evaluation known as the Trimodal Invariance Rule, or TMIR audit. The TMIR audit is a strict analytical filter that evaluates claims across geometrical, algebraic, and discrete modalities simultaneously to eliminate untyped analogies. Book LXIV flawlessly survived evaluation across all three modalities. It demonstrated perfect algorithmic scaling without relying on unproven transformations or heavy-tail transients. The formal documentation of this survival records the equation's variables as exact harmonic statuses within the topological canon. Following this audit, Book LXVI has been officially integrated into the master canon block of the dyadic lineage ledger under the updated V2 format. Capturing mathematical friction as an accountable, exact variable guarantees structural stability. It elevates what initially appeared as a mathematical anomaly into a reproducible, universal truth. The formal integration of the Vancouver Declaration establishes a rigorous new baseline for theoretical physics. Theorists no longer need to rely on arbitrary axioms, nor must they assume frictionless voids and empty sets to force their equations to converge. The approach pivots entirely from attempting to build reality up from nothing to precisely carving out coherent structures from the infinite totality. This is the core thesis of the theory of infinity. The universe is extracted ex totalite, from the whole, carved out strictly via exact topological boundaries and the universal application of symmetry. The chiral pi resonance modality realizes this mathematically. The continuous, transcendental perimeter of the circle has finally been knitted explicitly into the discrete, physical progression of nature. By forcing a mathematical system to internalize its own boundaries, the friction of the void is contained. Mathematical chaos is permanently stabilized into a perfect, parity-even harmonic.